If you'd like to turn in your Bibles to Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 1. As we look at the story of Daniel this morning, at least the first chapter of it, it's before we get to the lion's den or any of those things, we'll see kind of a struggle going on between God's people and the people of Babylon, and maybe a lot of their thoughts within that. And I think as we think about living in exile, we will definitely see a little piece here for us of what it is like sometimes, to feel like maybe you're not in control, that you don't have the power that you would like to have. Because I think this is really a story about power, especially in the first chapter, but even throughout the book, about who is in control, who has the power, who has the authority. And as I think about this idea of power, I was thinking about every time I go to visit my mom up in Holdenville, it's usually in the afternoon or early evening, and almost every time I go up there, I will walk into her room, and there playing on the TV is the Andy Griffith Show. And actually, it was kind of funny. I went in there, I think it was Friday evening, and it was an episode that I had already seen in her place there in Holdenville once before, where Otis is in the jail and all that stuff. The thing about Andy Griffith, if you've never watched it, there's this deputy, Barney Fife, played by Don Knotts, who is very assured of himself, but everyone around him is not so assured of his power and authority. And he carries around his gun, and he carries around, if you've watched the show, what does he carry in his pocket? The bullet, one bullet. There in his pocket, should he ever need to use the gun. I think I've seen an episode somewhere along the way where he fumbles around for the bullet and drops it and tries to pick it up and get it into the gun. And in Barney's mind, he is kind of the epitome of power and authority. He's got the badge, he's got the gun, he's got the bullet, even though it's not in the gun. People have to answer to him, and he kind of carries himself around with a bit of a walk, and he wants you to know that he is powerful and in charge. And I think the world around us feels kind of the same way. And sometimes we might need to stop and realize that what we're looking at is Barney Fife in comparison to God. For Daniel, he doesn't know Barney Fife because it hasn't come along yet, but he understands that all these powers and authorities that are around him are so small and insignificant compared to God that there is no question which direction he should go, who has the power and who is in control. So keeping that in mind as we go through Daniel chapter 1, says, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. So this is roughly 605 BC. For those of you who care about timelines and such, people will argue a few years on either side of it, but it's basically in the neighborhood of 605 BC. It's kind of hard to nail down because the Jews had one calendar, the Babylonians had a different one, and everything is a little bit close. But we're somewhere around 605 BC. And again, this is a consideration of power. And one other thing to note before we get further into the story, it mentions here that in this time of Nebuchadnezzar that they besieged Jerusalem. And a lot of people will want to point to this as, well, here's a problem with Scripture. Because if you look in Babylonian history, the besieging of Jerusalem happens in 597 BC, which is, do math real quick in my head, 8 years later. And there are a number of ways to explain this that are not, Scripture is not accurate or not consistent or any of those things. Just a couple, just should anybody ever throw this at you, I don't think anyone probably will, but just in case. The Hebrew word used for besieging here, basically could mean confining, it could mean being hostile toward, and even if it wasn't the all-on destruction of Jerusalem happening at this point, there was clearly a hostility towards Jerusalem, and there was a need to try to confine them into the space they were in. Secondly, we have two different besieging of Jerusalem in Babylonian history. That's not to say there wasn't a third. And maybe in Jewish history we have one that is not recorded in Babylonian history. If that is the case, my guess is somewhere along the way, archaeologically, that will be found out, and everyone will be able to go, aha, there it is. But any one of those things could be why you have these different besiegings. Just an aside. So in this third year, there is the besieging that goes on, and this besieging is an attempt by Nebuchadnezzar to show his power over their community or over their government. And I think we probably feel this way from time to time, don't we? That the forces around us in the world in which we live are trying to exercise power over the people that we have. And so maybe it's our church community. You feel like you are further and further backed into a corner as to how it is to do church. And so, for those who may be younger and don't remember these days, there was a time where hardly anything was open on Sunday. And so there was not a competition between church and something else because there weren't other options. There was a time where, if you have kids that play travel ball or something like that, there was a time where Sundays were an absolute no-go on that. Nowadays, we have a lot of folks who get to know other churches and other towns pretty well because they're in those towns for travel ball. We have a family that comes here from time to time that I will recognize and I think, why do I know them? And then I will see their son come in a baseball uniform and go, aha, that's why I know them. They come here during travel ball season when travel ball brings them here. There are all kinds of things in community that have shifted in that way. There used to be an expectation that people were going to be a part of a church somewhere, doing something. There used to be a time, and we've mentioned this before, where being a minister, or as everyone else talks, a pastor around town, was a thing of respect. And now it is just, people maybe adjust what they say just a little bit, but not even that as much anymore. And as we look in our community, we feel like, well, there is a power that is being held over our community. Nebuchadnezzar is trying to do the same thing when it comes to Jerusalem. When he comes in, he wants them to know that he is in charge and he is in control. And most people will give in to that. Most people in our culture do the same thing, don't they? I don't want to pick on the travel ball folks because I don't know who does that and who doesn't, so it's not individualized here, but you actually don't have to do that. I know this may be shocking, but there are other options beyond that. Even though things are open on Sundays now, you don't have to go there. You can still do other things. You can still have time with church and family and all of that stuff. The first time I came here to be with you, I think it was October of 2017, if I remember right. I came and I preached and I was the tryout guy and all of that. And you guys took me to Pigskins afterwards, and I had delightful barbecue and realized Oklahoma was the place to be. And as I sat there and ate, I thought, this is great. Pigskins is no longer open on Sundays. And I will tell you, occasionally it annoys me just a little bit because I want the barbecue. But then I think, church day, Chick-fil-A. Every now and then I'll think, I'd love to have Chick-fil-A today. It's not open. These businesses have figured out, we can still operate and do this at the same time. It's doable. People told Truett Cathy he was crazy with Chick-fil-A when he said he was going to do it that way. Worked out all right, didn't it? And so as we look at different people within our world have figured out you can still be a Christian within the community that is being told we have power over you. Continuing on, verse 2, it says, the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them into the land of Shinar to the house of his God and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. And you will notice the shift from big G to little g within this verse. You have God, whose things are being taken away or given by his power, and they're being placed in the place of another God, most likely Marduk, there with Babylon, and he's going to put all these vessels in, which is a statement of his power over their God. And this is how the deities of this day and time worked. If you'll remember back to Moses and the 10 plagues that come over Israel, each of those plagues was God's statement over a different god of Egypt, that he was above those gods. And so when people would come in and they would conquer a land in this day and time, they would take the things that were dedicated to the gods of the land that they had conquered, and they would take them back and put them in the temple of their god, or maybe sometimes destroy those things. And so as Nebuchadnezzar comes in, he's trying to say that our God is bigger than your God. And what we're going to see play out throughout the book of Daniel is that's not exactly so. Now, I believe that the world around us today tries to say the same thing, doesn't it? You will hear God belittled as a fairy tale or mocked with some sorts of names, and they will tell you about the standards of the world that are so much more important, and our God would say, not so fast. I'm still here. I am still in power, still in control. In verse 3, it says that the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and the nobility. So the wealthy, important folks, he's going to bring them along, youths without blemish, of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace and teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. And so in doing this, Nebuchadnezzar is saying, I'm now going to have power over your thoughts and your understanding. And so you will be taught things that just become to be assumed. And if there is anything that is a closer parallel to our life in exile in our world and the people of exile here, this is probably the one. Think of all of the things that have been taught nowadays and just assumed to be true that are so ungodly. And for Nebuchadnezzar, he is doing the same. He is trying to reset their standards. And this is one of the most difficult ones for us as Christians to overcome, because the world around us, they will think you are crazy. They will think you are hateful. They will think you are old-fashioned and backwards and any number of things. And yet there is still a standard that God has set forth. And for Daniel, it is no different. All of these people who are around him, who are one by one falling to this power of Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel is going to have to stand in a very different way. But Nebuchadnezzar understands, if I'm going to get to these people, these are the ones I'm going to have to pick off to do it. I believe, by the way, this is the same technique Satan uses today. He realizes, if I can catch the people that other people listen to, and if I can convince them that my way is better, then I don't have to worry about the other people. They'll follow in. And so for us as Christians, it is very important for us to realize, who is it that we are listening to? Or for those of us who have some influence over others, what is it that we are saying in the things that we say and in the way that we live? Nebuchadnezzar wants to take over, beginning with the young people. I think our world sometimes does the same thing, doesn't it? It does a lot of things that are very attractive to people who are early in life, and they think if we can get them, then gradually this will begin to change. And I think as you look at things that have shifted in our world culturally over the last 20 or 30 years, this has been the route a lot of that has happened. It has been slowly but surely people have grown up within a world that accepts things that we did not accept before, and now suddenly everything is different. And so he wants to get to the people through these young folks. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. So he now wants to take power over their daily life. And again, isn't this kind of the way the world works for us sometimes now too? For those of you who are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever social media you use, could you imagine a day without it? 2 days without it? 3 days without it? I was thinking back in the month of April when I was a youth minister one year, we had a fast from different things each week for a month. And so one of those weeks was social media, Facebook, which was only about 4 years old, I think, at that point. And our kids struggled with, oh man, day one was tough, but day two was tougher, and three. I read a book last week about kind of changing your habits. And one of the things the guy mentioned was he was spending too much time on social media. So he actually, he had an assistant at his job. He had his assistant change the password to his Facebook every Monday. And then every Friday, if he had accomplished the things he was trying to accomplish that week, she would give him the new password. And he could enjoy it over the weekend, and then Monday he would come back in and the same drill again. And he began to realize through the not having it for those 5 days of the week, he was kind of okay at the end of it. I think for a lot of us, we have had these different things that have come into our daily lives and have showed us this is the way you're supposed to live. Nebuchadnezzar does it through food and habits and all kinds of things, but he's exercising that they don't get to make those decisions anymore. Now, I think if we realized that's what was being done to us, we would push back against it. But we actually are having that done to us and don't even realize it. If you have, let me challenge you over the next couple days, if you have one of these, take note of, in the next few days, the times you take it out of your pocket intending to do something, and you hit a different icon instead, not the thing you intended to do. And I will tell you that that is the thing that has taken control over your daily life. There's an app on there that somewhere that is so much you just out of habit hit that button to know exactly where it is. It's done this. It has begun to take control. They're not always negative things on the surface. Even when you think of Nebuchadnezzar, eating and learning and all that, those are not bad things in and of themselves. But what they're taking the focus toward is changing these people's lives. So it says in verse 6 that among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, the tribe of Judah, of the tribe of Judah. And the chief eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. and Azariah he called Abednego. And interesting that one name kind of sticks, and I think it's because we're looking at the book of Daniel, and the other names become a little more of those Babylonian names that we'll find later. So they're even going to be having power over their identity exercised. And here we are in a world where everything is about identity, isn't it? And the world has told us you find your identity here or here or here. In the month that we're in, identity is all about gender and sexuality and all those kinds of things. But those are not the only ones. There are all kinds of places our world has tried to explain to us, here is your identity. When I was a college student, you would meet someone new and you would ask them, where are you from? What is your major? What club are you in? And that was how you began to identify people around campus. We grow into adults. What do you do for a living? Where are you from? Maybe what are your hobbies? You go into a job interview. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Every level we go to in life, there are these different identifiers we get tagged with. Even this morning in Bible class, as David was teaching, he mentioned something that engineers like. And I thought, it's identity. It's an engineer. But it's not the foremost. And so even as they are renamed, and even as in the book of Daniel, we find at least with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, those being the names that are used, I believe these people are hanging on to the identity that they have. I think we can tell by the way that they live. But Nebuchadnezzar says, I'm going to mold everything about you into what I think it should be. The world around us, same thing. They're going to take our schedules, they're going to take our identities, they're going to take our values and try to force it all into a place that is not where God has designed for us to go. And what you will notice, by the way, as Daniel pushes back a little bit here in a moment, is the way he goes about pushing back is not disrespectful. It is not hateful. It is in a way that honors God and honors the life that he is called to live. And maybe there's another good challenge for us. How do we, when we feel forced into this corner of all of these things that the world is telling us, you must be this way, and these are the values you must have, how do we push back a little bit in the other direction? But Daniel, in verse 8, says that Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And you will notice, I love this word, he resolved. Daniel did not react, which is where we get ourselves in trouble a lot. I can think of the times where I have done things that I have really regretted in an argument, especially arguments, and occasionally we'll have a disagreement in our marriage. It's been a long time. But occasionally we'll disagree about something. And the times I get myself into trouble is when I react. Occasionally with my kids, there will be something that I'm correct and they're wrong every once in a while. And I will get myself into trouble by the way I approach it, by reacting instead of resolving. And so Daniel resolves, and then he goes through the chain of command. He goes to the one who's directly above him and makes this request about the food. Now, I want you to think for a minute about the food. This is the way it's explained in the IVP Bible Background Dictionary. It's not so much something in the food that defiles. Now, I have been taught along the way, and maybe you have too, that this is about the food not being kosher, or that this is about the type of meat, or maybe that it was sacrificed to idols, or any number of things. It could be, and that could be true. We don't know that. We don't know that it's I know a lot of vegetarians love to point at this chapter and say, see, this is the... Anyway, like I said, I like pigskins. There are a lot of people that will point to a lot of different things, and we really don't know. But it describes it this way. It's not so much something in the food as much as it is the total program of assimilation. At this point, the Babylonian government is exercising control over every aspect of their lives, like we've looked at. Their identity, they think they're God, they think their community, they think now their daily life. They have little means to resist the forces of assimilation that are controlling them. They seize on one of the few areas where they can still exercise choice as an opportunity to preserve their distinct identity. Not just among themselves, but in such a way that other people will notice. So I think of, there was a time in the first century and in the coming centuries when Christians were imprisoned and tortured and all number of things, and somewhere along the way in the midst of that history came along the ichthus, which today, colloquially, the Jesus fish. You'll see it on cards, business cards. You'll see it on the back of cars, billboards. And it is that thing represented of Christians. And when they couldn't communicate well about that, one of them may draw one half of that, And then another one would come in and knew what it was and draw the other half of it so the two would know one another were Christians. It was their one way of maintaining a little bit of control. When I read the story of Corrie ten Boom, who was a prisoner in a concentration camp during the Second World War, they had found a Bible and they tore pieces of it so that each of them could have like a little section of the Bible there. And they were in a part of the concentration camp where the fleas were so bad that the guards didn't want to come in there because they did not want the fleas. And their way of maintaining just a little bit of control of their lives was to have this little piece of scripture there with them. For us, I feel like our society is moving in such a way that the pieces that we can control are going to get smaller and smaller. And for Daniel, it's the food. And he says, we're not going to do this. And whether it's not kosher, whether it's been sacrificed to idols, whether it's a meat thing, who knows? But for whatever reason, they want to grab control of this. So it says in verse 9 that God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. So what Daniel gets here from God is favor. Throughout the first 8 verses, it's been all about the control and the power that Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians think they have. And yet God, even though his vessels have been taken from the temple, still has the power to show his favor to Daniel. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and drink, for why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are your own age? So would you endanger my head with the king? And then Daniel said to the steward, from whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he says, basically, check the results. If you don't think we can live in this way and still be okay, if you don't think we can honor our God here in the midst of this, even though you've taken this, and this from us, if you don't think we can keep this one small little piece of eating different food, then just see what happens. Check the results. And in Daniel, you see something that's amazing. And something I don't think we see in us as much as I would like to see, myself included, as much as I'd like to see. It is a confidence in what God can do. Even when it seems like the world around us has shifted in such a different direction than we'd like to go, do we still have the confidence that God can operate within that? Because the entire book of Daniel that will be encouraged by all these great stories of faith, it happens in exile. The New Testament church, as they grow by leaps and bounds in the book of Acts, where does it happen? Under Roman rule, where they are persecuted, put to death, and the church keeps growing and growing and growing. If God can do good things in those two places, why could he not in 2023 in Ada, Oklahoma? It doesn't make sense, does it? And so Daniel has this confidence. Just look and see what happens. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in the flesh, when it was a good thing, by the way. They weren't all about fitness then. Better in appearance and fatter in the flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. I was born at the wrong time. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. And he gives him here, by the way, vegetables, which is vegetarians will get on board with this, or people will think it's vegetables instead of meat. Interestingly, the word here used in Hebrew for vegetables is never used to refer to food for humans in the entire Old Testament. Only here. And there are a lot of theories behind that. It's used in other ways, such as the stuff that animals eat. It's used in other ways, such as the seeds that will be planted and something will be grown. And so there are commentators that think this is not so much vegetables versus meat, but maybe they are now given the power to grow their own food rather than to have it provided for them by the state. And so they are going to go and do something different, remembering God's provision instead of Nebuchadnezzar's provision. I don't know, but just something interesting to think of. As for these youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. Who's trying to train them in all that stuff? Nebuchadnezzar. Who thinks he has power over that and is giving them all of that? Nebuchadnezzar. Who is giving them all of this? God. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. So the learning and the skill and the understanding, it's all coming from God. And it still does. It all comes from God. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. There were none like them. So doing it God's way, as opposed to what they were being forced into, is actually better. Better so much that the people trying to do this to them also saw it. I believe this is still the case in the world around us. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. We started with timeline, we'll end again with timeline. The first year of King Cyrus, 539 BC. We started in 605 BC at the beginning of Daniel chapter 1. We're now to 539, which, if you do the math, 66 years. For 66 years, Daniel is living this different life among the people with which he lives, the people who think they have power over him, honoring God. And these people think they have power over his community and his God and his thoughts and understanding and his daily life and his identity, and they don't. But God does. He looks instead for favor from God. Check the results. I believe the world around us is the same way. If we look at everything that thinks it has power over us, all of the corners we are trying to be backed into, God would say, seek favor with me instead, and then check the results. And what you will find, I think, is your life will be 10 times better and a whole lot more. This morning, if you are not following him, if it seems like it's so difficult in the world in which we live, it couldn't be more difficult than what we're looking at here in the book of Daniel. The thread of his very life, and he stands in front of that and does the thing of God instead. This morning, you can follow him, be baptized into him, and you can begin to live that life. Or if you have found yourself just weighted down by everything going on here in Exile in the world around you, know that you can come back, your life can be changed, and you can follow him again. If there's some way we can help you, please come while we stand and sing.